Jeremy Cohen. So Jeremy has been working to empower data teams with DBT for nearly 4 years. He got his start building modern data stacks for up and coming organizations as an analytics engineering consultant. So the title of his presentation is The Road to DBT version 1.0. So welcome on the stage, Jeremy Cohen.
Thank you so much. It's great to be speaking with all of you at Crunch Conference 2021. Let's get right into it. So my name's Jeremy Cohen. I use he, him pronouns. I'm a product manager for DBT Core. You can see I sort of slipped that into the presentation title as well. We can talk a little bit about what that means. I'm also the head of office for the Marseille branch of DBT Labs. It's right here. It's this room. It's a little bit of a joke, but feel free to chat me up. We can talk more jokes. I'm in the DBT community Slack at JERCO, Jericho. You can also follow not me, but DBT Labs, certainly, on Twitter and lots of other places. I made a move recently from Philadelphia, which is where I lived for a long time, and where a year and a half ago, I was working for a company named Fishtown Analytics, using DBT every day. Now I live in Marseille, working for a company named DBT Labs. It's the same company, still working on DBT, but a lot has changed in the last 3.5+ years, let alone the last year alone. And we're going to talk a little bit about that during this time. So what is DBT? It's a good question. If you're not familiar, hopefully I can give you enough information really quickly so that you can still enjoy and appreciate this presentation. If you are familiar with what DBT is, if you've actually had the experience of using it yourself, you may appreciate and pick up some of the finer details of what we're going to be talking about. But I am hopeful that in either case, I'll have something to say to you by the end of this. So really quickly, at a very high level, DBT is a tool, kind of even a set of tooling for analytics, for analysts, analytics engineers. And analytics engineer is a term that we've really come to know and love at DBT Labs, because we believe that the work of doing analytics should be done with some of the scruples, the principles of good engineering. So DBT at its core is open source. It subscribes to some of the best practices, we believe, of software engineering, like analytics as code that lives in version control, in environment control, and cleanly separated development versus production versus CI and CD. Code that's modular and provides helpful visuals and abstractions to make that code modular and maintainable for a long time to come. Another big assumption, big operating premise here is that analytics should be done using SQL. So DBT is very much a tool for writing SQL, deploying SQL, testing SQL, all of these things. But it is, at the end of the day, a belief that readability of code is the most important, and SQL is nowadays the lingua franca of data. Also, DBT is extensible to really any SQL-speaking data platform. So as long as you buy that premise, as long as you're willing to say, yes, SQL is the lingua franca of data in 2021, it's the most accessible to the most number of people. Well, whether they are writing SQL on Snowflake or BigQuery or Apache Spark or Databricks or Redshift or there's probably an adapter to help them use DBT with that platform query engine database. That's DBT in a really quick nutshell. We're going to be talking about some other things, I think, in a moment. But this is a nice visual. I took this right off of our website. Some of my colleagues did a lot of amazing work to make this come together. This is the modern data stack, the modern data ecosystem flow diagram, whatever you want exactly to call it. Raw data comes in. This is the E part, the extraction. It is loaded into the modern data platform, be it Snowflake, be it BigQuery, be it something else. DBT is the framework in which to develop data models, test and document those data models, deploy those data models into production, and then from production, they can go into BI tool of choice, machine learning, model training of choice, operational analytics, a reverse ELT solution of choice, and so much more. There's just over 7,000 weekly active projects using DBT every single week. This is effectively our proxy for how many companies, organizations, groups, teams are getting a lot out of using DBT, and it's almost certainly an undercount, as with everything else in anonymous usage tracking of open source software. So we just hit the 7,000 mark. When I joined the company way back on the 8th of January, 2018, we had 120 weekly active projects. So it's been a really long and exponential climb since then. A lot has changed. A lot in terms of my role at the company has changed as well. Looking at this chart, it's a very neat chart. It looks almost monolithic, but there's been a lot of change in this time. It has not been a steady stream, the same product, the same user experience all the way through. This is that same graph split out by minor version of DBT core that we've been working on, released, put out into the world. And we've still got lots and lots of folks out there who are using versions that were released over a year ago, even multiple years ago even. But with each one of these, each colorful chunk out here, there's new features, new work, new changes that we've been making to this foundational tool set that so many people, so many organizations have been putting right at the heart of their modern data platforms. You can see right at the top there, in the very top right, there's like a little hint of something kind of orangey goldenrod. That's version 0.21, which we just put out this week. I think it was this week. And very exciting. But you'll notice that all of these versions for their very first number is 0 all the way through. So truly, we found ourselves in a little bit of a conundrum at the start of this year, a good one, a good conundrum to have. DBT, certainly the core open source version, is beloved by so many people. There's such a thriving community of people who have coalesced around it. Sorry about that one. And alongside the exponential growth in companies and organizations using and adopting the tool has also been growth in the community of people contributing to, asking questions about, pushing forward the practice of analytics engineering in the DBT community Slack and everywhere else. Meanwhile, the core software itself is version 0, major version 0 software. And it's not scaling well to meet the needs of some Fortune 500 plus companies, some very, very, very large enterprises that want to put it at the heart of their data modeling flows. So those are two pretty big problems, and we had a year to solve them. Version 0 software, again, if this isn't something that's super meaningful to you, if you aren't very used to seeing number, this is semantic versioning. This is how just about all software out in the world is versioned nowadays. And major version 0 has a pretty special meaning. It's initial development. Anything may change at any time. The public API should not be considered stable. Whereas version 1.0.0 defines the public API. Everything from then on should be backwards compatible or a new major version, DBT 2.0, which is not the subject of this presentation, and I can't tell you exactly when I'll be back to give it. For now, we needed to say, this is DBT core. This is 1.0. So this talk is going to be a little bit inside baseball-y. It's not about any one amazing, exciting feature that we uncovered, discovered was the missing piece of our product. We had a really well-loved product. We just needed to take it to the next level of maturity, of performance, of readiness for the world. So this is going to be a lot more bunts and stolen bases, small ball, if this is a sporting metaphor that's familiar to you. It's going to be a lot of things that feel kind of obvious in retrospect and maybe aren't that interesting, but maybe there'll be something that resonates with you, and you can tell me what the most interesting parts of this talk were after or in the Q&A to follow. There's one thing that maybe I can plug into here as a discourse in the data community of late, really over the last 2 years, which is this question of whether data teams at companies ought to be service providers or product managers. And there's been a real move, a real push to say it is not the role of a data team of people cleaning, preparing, naming, normalizing data models. It is not their role to be the first responders to any ad hoc query request. It is their role to prepare, document, stabilize, and provide these kind of core data assets, almost in the way that a product team would provide a product to customers, to consumers. There's a lot to already read in here. I recommend that folks take a look at any and all of these. My only foot in this, my only thumb on this scale is that I made this change from being a data person to being a product person. So my own personal growth within the company was moving from, if you'll forgive the wordplay here, managing data in production, using DBT every day, doing full stack analytics engineering, whatever it was we thought that meant in 2018, on behalf of all these fast growing startups on a consulting basis, to, in 2020, last year, I made the switch to working on the product teams, one of the first product managers at the company, with the remit of taking a beloved tool, a centerpiece of the modern data ecosystem, pick which contracts are essential, lock them in, document them really well, make the whole thing 100 times faster, hopefully don't ruin something that lots of people love along the way. And that maps to an org change that took place over the same amount of time. As Fishtown Analytics became DBT Labs, we moved from a bootstrapped consultancy that had to make the most with what we had, which is one full-time engineer writing DBT core code, to a team effort, or else no effort, wasted effort. We had to figure out what the most important directions to move in were and bring as many people along for the ride as possible. So maybe some things that you'll be able to get out of this, but you can tell me if not. I'm not going to make the analogy too explicit or really try to force anything, but there are definitely some pieces of my experience in managing a data product that data teams who want to think about managing their data assets as products could think about too, or could benefit from the comparison. All of these things are things we're about to talk about. And kind of our own mottos to work by, guiding principle, guiding light. I think for DBT as a product and me as a PM, but equally for, I think, when I did work on building data assets as products and work as a product manager for those data assets, make the easy things easy, make the hard things possible, and then personally make the best decisions we can with the information we have at the time. I wrote this in past tense because really there's no way to know if they were the right decisions or not until we've, in the fullness of time, gathered all the information, all the evidence, and been able to look back and see. So with that, what is DBT at its core? This was really the foundational question underlying a lot of the prioritization work that we had to do starting last fall, starting in January of this year. And I already gave you this spiel earlier, but we actually needed to get a lot more specific than this, a lot more granular, and think about what literally is this piece of software that we've created, that we've kept adding on to as we identified new, interesting, compelling functionality that would benefit analysts, analytics professionals, as we did the work ourselves, figuring out what tooling do we need in this moment for this client project, for this new warehouse, for this new use case. Take all of that, amass it all together, and figure out what is this thing that we've got. It's a big repository with a lot of Python in it. So with a fairly new team, pretty new to the code base, new to the workflow, new to the ecosystem, going through and saying, what exactly DBT Core exists to do? And figure out that some things it probably doesn't exist to do, even if it's doing them today. At the same time, and I'm stealing this slide from a demo day staging that we did all the way back in February of this year. At the same time, the product strategy of the company also is maturing and solidifying. So acknowledging that there is a real handoff here between DBT Core and DBT Cloud, the commercial proprietary product of DBT Labs, of the company, the most mature, stateful, identity-aware, user experience-rich way to develop and deploy DBT projects. It's important to say what the core product actually exists to do so that we know what ought to go where and under which license. So what did we settle on? These are 5 words. I could have picked some different words that have similar meanings, but I think these do a pretty good job of capturing at least 80% of the most important stuff. Before we can cut the ribbon, before we can say this is DBT Core 1.0, it's got to be performant at scale. It has to feel intuitive, at least more intuitive than it did on January 1st. It has to feel stable. It has to feel extensible. It has to feel maintainable for us as the people who actually write code in the DBT code base, respond to issues, respond to bug reports, talk about it with thousands of people out in the world. That's how we go from, let's say, the really opportunistic version of what should we work on. This is the set of at least the first 6 most upvoted issues in the DBT repo. Got 20, 30, 40 thumbs up on these, tons and tons of comments. These are amazing features. They're things I so badly want to do, but they're not the things we should do for 1.0, because DBT 1.0 needs to be performant. It needs to be intuitive. It needs to have the right interfaces for extensibility, all the things that we're talking about. So what exists between us and 1.0, at least in January when we were thinking about it? Some things needed to stay stable and stay the same. Some things needed to change. A lot needed to stay the same. People really like what DBT does. It has good community fit, product market community fit. Some things needed to change. Performance was the biggest one. Counterintuitive interfaces, another place I really wanted to spend some time. Or if there are missing gaps that would make a lot of sense to fill in, to be able to say, this is a complete and whole and ready to use thing, not just for early adopters, but for version 1 adopters. So find the right balance, hit our ambitious goals, cut the ribbon. This is DBT. Performant. This is one version of what developing a DBT project looks like. Again, for those of you who are familiar, it'll look familiar. For those of you who aren't, maybe you can just trust me when I say the thing on the left is a model. It's a SQL query that is going to be materialized as a view or table in the database. You can also define properties for that model, and you can define project level configurations for a whole bunch of models all at once. So say, I want these things to be materialized as tables rather than views, or give them certain tags that I can use later for metadata purposes or resource selection purposes. There's a lot going on here. Again, if you're brand new to DBT, you might be noticing that these curly braces are not exactly ANSI SQL. Those are these kind of magical ref statements that we use so that we can determine that dim customers, the model in this example, depends on stage customers and customer orders and customer payments. We can take all the code here and turn it into this. Turn it into a DAG of models and seeds and sources and exposures, a DAG of transformations, a DAG that is the essential analytics model, analytics universe for this organization, this Jaffle shop. How do we get from this to this? There's a lot of steps, and those steps were not super well understood by our team. They were cobbled together over a long period of time, and they were very slow. This kind of collective process, which sometimes we call parsing, sometimes we call manifest construction, sometimes I call it mise en place. On January 1st, in some especially large projects, that process took 8 minutes. You would type DBT run, want to create some models in the database, and you would have to go get a coffee. No choice about it. You have to take a break. Our goal by the end of the year was to have all projects, all sizes, start up in 5 seconds or fewer, which we were measuring as 1 millisecond of parsing manifest construction per file in the project. So a project that's 5,000 files, which is about as big as we expected to see at the start of the year. That's already a little bit of a lowball estimate, but it's still our goal. 5 seconds, no more, no less. Well, maybe less. We made some pretty good progress here, did some really detailed performance analysis, and for the first time ever said, this is a thing we know about, it's a thing we care about, it's a thing we're going to be measuring in great detail. We actually put out a patch release just after that with a 3 to 4x speed up across the board. Just really opportunistic changes. The way that we constructed tests on models, really darn slow. The libraries and dependencies we were using to serialize information into and out of Python objects to validate them, that they had all the expected types, really darn slow. So did all the easy stuff first. Still a lot of really impressive work, 3 to 4 times faster. In 2020, in July this summer, we worked up to 2 really big bets, one around partial parsing, one around a totally new way to extract information out of those SQL files that we were looking at earlier. It's ever better, including some improvements in 021, which we just put out this week. And by December, everything's going to be on by default. In 1.0, all of these bets we want to pay off. So partial parsing, pretty simple if you think about it. You run DBT, you edit one model, you parse one model, that's it. Why go through thousands and thousands of files when you've only changed one? So the upshot is this is 97% faster, actually almost like 99% with some of our latest changes for really big projects, down from 8 minutes to just about 5 seconds for some of those really large projects. This is a hard problem. There's lots and lots of edge cases to negotiate as soon as we get stateful about something that didn't need to previously be stateful. There's also a lot of payoff to being able to draw a sharp division between manifest construction, build up this internal representation of all the stuff in a project, and then just executing that internal representation. We were actually able to draw a really clear line between these 2 parts of the product, these 2 parts of the invocation process that had previously been really tightly entangled. The other big bet and thing we did a lot of work on was experimental parsing. So can we, without using Jinja, the library that we use for a lot of our templating, for a lot of our kind of Pythonic operations that are exposed within DBT, the way that users have superpowers on top of SQL, can we extract just the information we need without relying on Jinja every single time? We wrote a fairly simple tree sitter grammar, could statically parse about just under 60% of models in the wild via sampling. We were able to confirm it's just about always right. Now, is always right. This is going to unlock a lot of cool stuff for us next year, I think, but for the time being, it's 3 times faster. The last piece of this, and the piece that really is important, because all that work is well and good, but if we don't have processes in place to confirm that our performance stays at an acceptable level, may as well undo the work that we did all this year. So regression testing as well, making sure that DBT performance is always going to be at an acceptable level. DBT core needs to be intuitive. So performance was the really, really big focus because it's existential. If it's that slow, if it takes 8 minutes, no one is going to use it. Now we're getting into, okay, people can find ways to use it, but can we avoid a lot of confusion on the front end? Naming things is hard, and we are working with a product that's been around for over 5 years now. So there are some names that we came up with in 2017, 2018 that just don't make as much sense today. It could go down all through this list, but essentially dedicating the work, though it is not glamorous, to naming things in a way that is going to be as intuitive and accessible to a brand new user as possible, and to a brand new person contributing DBT code. It's not just users of the end product who suffer when names are confusing. It's also us trying to figure out what something is doing in the code base. So context and config are two very overloaded terms, doing our little part, little by little, to split them apart. The other piece of this is, although I hear a lot from early adopters and folks who have been with us for a long time, just acknowledging that this is sort of the same chart I showed you earlier, because the product usage is growing exponentially. The majority of users today, the majority of weekly active projects started using DBT this year. They never knew that snapshots were once called archives, or all of the other things that we've renamed and reworked over the course of time. So if there's a time to pick better names, even at the risk of some confusion, that time is now. I'm picking on my colleague Sean here just a little bit because I almost could have planted this question. It's like, is there a point in renaming something if it's going to be confusing to users who have been around for a long time? If it's the right name, it is. And the best time to do it is right now. The other piece of intuition that I just want to quickly mention, because I said it wasn't going to be very glamorous, not tons of net new features, but where there is a clear missing piece that would really bring the whole puzzle together, we should do it. Make the easy things easy. Make it really easy to follow opinionated best practices. For us, most recently, that's looked like a new task, a build command that makes it so that you can take models and tests and snapshots and tests on sources and seeds, all of the building materials of a project. Previously, these things were isolated into their own deployment commands, their own tasks. Why not do it all? And do it in such a way that when tests fail, you don't run downstream resources. So again, opinionated, but make it easy to follow those best practices. This is sort of obligatory. I figured out how to make these animations in Keynote. And so I made this a couple months ago. I just sort of have to include it every single time I talk about DBT build. Sorry if you've already seen this like 5 times. People don't seem to mind too much. It wouldn't be a presentation about DBT core if I didn't include lots and lots of screenshots of the DBT community Slack. Some people just saying that's amazing, and some people having some very, very detailed follow-up questions. Both are great responses, and I appreciate them a lot. DBT core version 1.0.0 needs to be stable. All well and good what's in 1.0.0, but what is in 1.0.1? So again, if this isn't something you've thought about a ton, it's maybe going to be a little dry, but semantic versioning, pretty darn important. And I think there's a lot of applications too for folks who are building data products that are data assets. Major version 1, once you're here, that's it. Easier upgrades from here on. Everything ought to be backwards compatible. Minor versions, new functionality ought to be backwards compatible. We are saying there are some specific interfaces we're calling out that could have breaking changes in minor versions. It's not going to be the code in folks' projects. And patch releases, I don't even want to think about them. Just upgrade. You get fixes and no worries. So what are we saying can change in minor versions? Well, these are really important interfaces to DBT core. And they're almost things that we are thinking about and versioning a little bit separately because they're not code in projects. They're like second order effects of using DBT. The first is folks who rely on metadata artifacts, which we started contracting and documenting in January in version 0.19. We've already had a couple of version bumps, a couple of new schemas. We're going to keep doing that after 1.0. We want folks to be using and leveraging really, really valuable metadata coming out of DBT projects. And if we can restructure those artifacts in minor ways, tweak them to make them more usable, more accessible, we're going to do it with really clear communication. Same for adapters. If you are the maintainer, if you're a lucky person who maintains an adapter that plugs into DBT Core to extend its functionality to a new database platform, query engine, we're going to be really, really clear about when there can be changes in the interfaces, the Python methods that adapters hook into, but they are not going to change in breaking ways in patch releases. So that means we can actually version adapter plugins a little more flexibly, a little more generously, and get core patches for free. Again, I know this is really in the weeds here, but this is something I've had to think so much about, and I'm kind of convinced that it is a versioning and clear communication around what can happen in each version is one of the most important tools in anybody who maintains a product interface, if not the most. What can't change? Project code, upgrade, package code, which is just a kind of project code. It's a kind of project that you install in your project. So we can loosen up tight version pins and avoid some of the annoyance, some of the frustration that comes when folks historically have had to deal with breaking changes in packages associated with breaking changes in new DBT core versions. No more. DBT core needs to be extensible. We need to be giving people the right constructs to build with. There's only so much we can do right out of the box. This has been a real, again, a real realization for me this year. There are going to be some very cool, very glamorous things that we enable indirectly. If there are workarounds, if there are constructs that folks can build with, we can make hard things possible, even if they're not doable right out of the box. Here we've got a list of what I think are some of the most complex and yet also powerful features in DBT core today. I think there's so much we can do extending and recombining these things. And it is a victory if folks in the community, people out there are able to build with these constructs, build with DBT, develop packages and code and snippets and put it out there in the world, even if these are not features that are baked into DBT core right from the get-go. That simply has to be the way that we go about this, the way that we play it. Because we need to focus on some even harder problems, like the right entry points to DBT core as an interface. We don't have a locked-in Python API today. We won't by 1.0. I want to. I want to very much. Better testing suites for some of that more complex code in adapter plugins, but also in custom materializations. The idea of task extensibility, not something that's doable today, but something I'm really interested in. And I'll let you read the last one, more to talk about in the future. Last but not least, DBT core 1.0 needs to be maintainable by us. And one of the last things that we're doing before we cut the very first beta of 1.0.0 is we're actually splitting up our concerns. We're separating out all DBT plugin code, or just about all of it. So DBT Redshift, DBT Snowflake, DBT BigQuery, the DBT RPC server. These are all moving outside of the DBT core repo code base because these things can be triaged, tested, versioned, and maintained separately, potentially even eventually by other folks, other teams, other community members even. We want DBT core to have a really clear, narrow focus, really well-documented contracts, lots and lots of tests. It's not glamorous. It's what we need to do. So today, there's one repo with lots of stuff in it, lots of GitHub stars, which is great, lots of issues, can be great. We're actually splitting this out and have done over the last week or two, soon to rename the DBT repo into DBT core. We've already got our 3 main plugins out in their other repos. This is using GitHub's experimental repo visualizer tool. I really like it. I think it's cool to look at a code base this way and to see all that goes into the core DBT functionality, all that goes into testing it versus what it looks like to have a really well plugged in and maintained and tested plugin. It's totally doable. And there's only going to be more and more and more stuff that plugs into and depends on DBT core. We're building really an open source ecosystem, and core is at the heart of a lot of it. And so there needs to be a lot of clarity and a lot of consistency to underpin this ecosystem. We've got our DBT Labs maintained plugins over there on the left, our community and vendor maintained plugins on the bottom for other adapters, other databases. We've got things like metadata integrations, the DBT docs site, if you really think about it, even projects like Open Lineage, like Lightdash that I'm so excited about, and then other tooling, other packages, other ways to use DBT in VS Code or with pre-commit checks or just handy-dandy hacks around. I hope Bastien doesn't mind me describing DBT sugar in that way. In many cases, these are folks who are new to open source maintenance. These are data teams. These are analysts. These are not software engineers. But the fact that we've been able to welcome people into an ecosystem like this and turn analysts into potentially the maintainers of open source software, I find that really personally fulfilling. So keep your eyes peeled. We're cutting a beta very soon, DBT 1.0.0, at least TBD, but it's not so TBD, more like TBA. I'll be announcing the final DBT 1.0 release at Coalesce this December, 8th of December at 10:30 p.m. CET. Oh, that's this time zone. So a little bit late for us, but it's worth staying up for. Like Happy New Year. Coalesce, you should absolutely come if you like conferences about data, about analytics, about even data product management. There's so much here. If you've also liked this talk or liked some of the problems that I've been talking about, I would really encourage you to check out some of the open roles we've got at DBT Labs. And it goes without saying, none of what I've been describing would be possible without the amazing colleagues that I have, especially on the core engineering team, Leah and Kyle and Gerda and Nate and Ian and now Emily and Matt. It's a pleasure to work with you every single week. So with that, that is all I've got for you. I'd love to welcome any questions.
Thank you very much, Jeremy, for your amazing talk. Indeed, we have some questions, and we have about 5 minutes for them. So let's see, we have 2 of them at the moment, but there might come more. So the first question is, how easy it is to migrate from existing ETL tools? Example, PDI. Can DBT conclude lineage from existing SQL or ETL jobs?
Yeah, that's a great question. And sorry, I went a few minutes over. We'll do our best to get through the questions we've got. So today, DBT isn't capable of inspecting a bunch of raw SQL and deciding exactly what the lineage is. That's something to think about in the future, maybe. There might be some movements there. But for now, I would say it's actually really important and really impactful to, as I showed earlier, go in and specify explicit dependencies inside your SQL. So that ref function that I showed earlier, there's also a source function for raw source tables. There's 2 really good reasons to do this. One is then DBT is able to infer lineage. The other is that's actually how we do environment management. So I'm able to run that model code in my development environment, my, say, Jericho Scratch schema. It runs in production into a different schema, maybe even a different logical database if it's Snowflake, or a different project if it's BigQuery. And all of that is enacted through that ref function. So both environment management, being able to run the same code in multiple different environments, and lineage dependency identification.
Thank you.
But I would say, yeah, the process of migrating from existing SQL and existing tool, it's not such a huge lift, and it's also a pretty good chance to understand what your code is actually doing today. I've been involved, certainly in my consulting days, I was involved in a couple of migrations and refactors where we uncovered some hidden dependencies that weren't previously well understood, and had to rethink the data model in a way that ended up being really, really beneficial.
Thank you, Jeremy. Then the second question, are you considering adding features that are dependent on the chosen DB engine? Example, weak query, scheduled queries, or is that against your product vision?
That's a neat question. We absolutely have support for and take advantage of features that are unique to specific databases. And I think the split apart of our adapter plugins into their own code bases and repositories is only one more step in that direction. I would love to see some real focused attention and kind of maintenance support from our team and other community members going forward on like just BigQuery expertise in that DBT BigQuery plugin. When it comes to kind of scheduling and deployment, it does tend to be a little trickier to integrate with custom database features. So like BigQuery scheduled queries, or say like jobs clusters in Databricks. But anything that is SQL accessible as a feature can absolutely be a DBT feature. So we make heavy use of partitioning and clustering on BigQuery, of clustering on Snowflake, of transients for tables, of zero copy cloning, all of these things that are pretty unique and pretty different across databases. As long as it's exposed to the SQL API, so to speak, we can make use of it.
Thank you, Jeremy.